Hi and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman and today I'm going to be sharing with you another block from my series on how I'm teaching you to pull scraps from your stash to make beautiful quilts. This particular quilt is in my Speedy Solutions Patterns book. It's called Mirror Mirror and I'm going to show you how to make this great scrappy block. It's a 16.5-inch block unfinished. Goes together very quickly. I think you'll enjoy this quilt. For a number of weeks now, I have been showing you quilt by quilt how to pull scraps from your stash to make the blocks that are used in each of these quilts. There's 12 patterns in this book, and it goes with my techniques book. So I have a Speedy Solutions techniques book, which teaches you how to cut, sort, organize, store, and then use your scrap stash. And then, of course, this is a patterns book. Between the two books, you're not only getting all the techniques you need to learn how to do that, but you're getting a total of 17 patterns. You can go out, there's a link in the description box below. You can go out to my website, and in my shop, you can take a look at all of the patterns that are in this book so that you can see what it is that you're going to be making as we go through this entire series. One other thing I want to point out is if you do not live in the United States, I do have this book series out on Amazon Kindle. So check in your Amazon in the country in which you live, and you should be able to find the book set there. So now let's go to the tabletop and see how to pull scraps to make this really beautiful scrappy quilt. So in the patterns book, you'll find the quilt here and all of the instructions. It lets you know how many squares you have to pull, what size, what values, etc. This is what the square is going to look like, or the block will look like. We're simply going to pull an 8.5-inch square. We're going to pull 3 of the darker 4.5-inch squares, 3 medium or complementary 4.5-inch squares, and a total of 6 light 4.5-inch squares. And it's basically a 4-patch. So this is one of the patches, this is a 4-patch, this is a 4-patch, and that's a 4-patch. Very simple to put together. So let me show you some of the scraps that I have pulled for this block. So I have my 8.5-inch square, and you'll notice that everything I'm pulling is very scrappy. I am simply just pulling scraps that may complement one another. There's darks, mediums, and lights, and it's a great way to use up all those oddball pieces that you might have in your scrap stash that you're not really sure what to do with. So this is a large print. It's bright and pretty, and so what we're going to do first of all is that will be one of the 4 patches, if you will, and then we are going to have some 4 patches that are light out in this corner and some 4 patches. Hopefully you can see all of this. It's such a large block. Let me pull it down a little bit farther. And these are white, so they're kind of hard to see on my tabletop. So we have these 3. And then what I'm going to do is you can put the lighter colors in here if you choose, or you can put the darker colors in that location. Doesn't really matter. It's your block, your quilt. Have fun with it. So this becomes a 4-patch. This becomes a 4-patch. This, of course, is a simple 4-patch. It's just one block, but it matches the 4-patch sizes. And this is a 4-patch. So we are going to go ahead and just sew these 3 units together and then attach it with this 8.5-inch square, and we have a beautiful, scrappy 16.5-inch block for our quilt. Now let me show you another selection of squares that I've pulled from my stash. So I have an 8.5-inch square and a bunch of 4.5-inch squares. Let me lay these out for you. Again, it's kind of a wild, crazy print. I'm going to put my darker 4.5-inch squares out in the corner. I'm going to put these medium 4.5-inch squares right here. And these are the lighter 4.5-inch squares. And I will put those right there. And again, we have 4 patches, if you will. This is a 1-patch, but these are 4 patches that will match up to that. And we have a beautiful 16.5-inch unfinished scrappy block, which will finish 16 inches in the quilt. Now let me get some of these sewn together. I'm going to make these 4 patches, I'm simply going to put them right sides together and probably do this in assembly line fashion and then bring it back and put them together here in the block. I'll show you that step by step. So here are my 3 4-patch units that I have just stitched together. So I have this unit, and this unit. And I'm not going to press them yet. You certainly could. You could absolutely go and press the seam allowances toward the darker section, but I am simply going to fold them, nest my seam allowances, making sure that one of the seams goes to the darker side. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch all 3 units. I'll bring them back here in just a second. I have just stitched all of the 4-patch units together. I've nested the seam allowances so that they nest beautifully, and I will take them now and get them pressed. And each of these 4-patch units must measure 8.5 inches, so it matches this 4-patch unit, and then we can sew it together as a block. So here is the first block. I gotta get rid of some of these threads here, they bug me. It's ready to go. I have pressed each of these and they were squared up to 8.5. The block now needs to be pressed. This center here has not been pressed. And so once that is done, then you square up the entire block to 16.5 inches. These blocks go together so quickly. You can do this in complete assembly line or chain stitching fashion just by grabbing your 4.5-inch container, having it available where you're putting together 3 lights with a medium and a medium with 3 darks. So simple and so quick. What a great way to use up your scrap stash. Let's say you have a lot of 2.5-inch squares and 5-inch squares. You could certainly make this same pattern using a 5-inch square for this position right here, and all of these squares would be 2.5-inch squares. When the block is constructed, it would finish at 9 inches and it would be unfinished at 9.5 inches. So you can certainly change the size of squares that you're using from your scrap stash. If you don't have a whole lot of 4.5-inch squares, you can certainly grab your 2.5-inch bin and your 5-inch bin and do the same block or the same square in another beautiful quilt, but using smaller squares from your stash. I want to point out, with all of the patterns in my books, I do give yardage. So if you don't have a scrap stash, no worries. Just use the yardage and you'll pull lights, mediums, and darks, and then you'll cut the squares or rectangles or whatever you're needing for each of these patterns from the yardage that you have, just like you would in any other pattern. I do have all of these patterns that are in this book as individual patterns as well, if that's what you're interested in. I do want to point out also that all of these patterns in the book can be made as large or as small as you want them to be by simply adding less or more blocks to create a larger or a smaller quilt. Many of these are mostly wall-size quilts because I do travel with these and lecture and teach, and it's easier for me to travel with smaller quilts than having king-size quilts in a suitcase. So most of these that you see here are smaller, but you can absolutely make every one of them larger if you want to make a bed size. This one would be fabulous if you had a king-size bed and you needed to make a quilt. That would be the way to go, I think. So give this a try. I think you'll enjoy it. I do also want to point out that when I've learned as I'm making scrappy quilts, oftentimes I will pull borders when I pull my scraps. And I've learned that I no longer pull it until after I've constructed the center of the quilt. I've learned that the border that I originally pulled, or the fabric that I pulled for the borders originally, didn't work. So I like to wait until I have the center of the quilt finished. Then I start auditioning. I'll start pulling all kinds of fabrics from my scrap stash and just identify which border really makes this pop. For this particular quilt, I had a darker border pulled and it just wasn't doing anything. I do have it a 2-inch white border, and then I have a peach-colored floral print that just really made it pop. And that's the one that I ended up using. For all of my quilts, I do quilt them myself. Most quilts are done on my long arm. Some of my smaller art quilts are done on my domestic machine, my Janome, but my Tin Lizzie is how I actually quilted this, and I did ruler work. I do not have a computerized long arm. My long arm is just one that I have to manually work with, so I love to do hand-guided free motion. I do ruler work. Sometimes I'll do pantos. This one I did some ruler work and as well as some free motion. So I'll get you a close-up here in just a moment at the end of this clip so that you can see how I actually quilted each of these blocks. If you'd like some ideas on how to do that, I also will show you how I quilted the borders. I've done a different design of it's a feather design. I love doing feathers, and I've done that out in the borders, so I'll show you that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a close-up of some of the quilting. As you can see on this block, I did some paisleys. Here on the border, I did some feathers and some, I forget what you call these, but they're just really simple designs to do on your long arm. Here I have done some ruler work, and I've simply used a ruler and gone around. I've got about a quarter of an inch inside outline for each of those squares, and then I have done a ruler work toward the center. So that's how I've done the different blocks that are in the quilt. Very simple quilting to do, nothing fancy, but really enjoyed it. And then just a simple feather on the outside. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on Mirror Mirror and how to make those wonderful, huge blocks, 16.5-inch blocks before they're finished in the quilt. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you do like the content that I provide, please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment. I love reading the comments from my subscribers. It's a lot of fun to chat with each of you. So I hope you have had a great day. I hope you've enjoyed this block. And until next time, happy quilting.